Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you tonight. I see additional people joining, and this will be recorded and posted to our website, just like every other community update has been, and any update that I've given at a Board of Education meeting. So there much has changed, but on the state level, but not much has changed for us here in Yorktown. There was a new guidance document that was issued by the New York State Department of Health Friday night at about 8:42 on April 9th. And we are still trying to understand some of the contradictory statements that are included in the document. But the encouraging piece, there were some impacts to our district, and I'll speak to those tonight. The encouraging reality is that much of what is being asked for in the guidance document, Yorktown's already doing. So I'll speak to some of the changes that we learned from that guidance document. I'll speak to the arrival and the dismissal. Many of you know that I have been outside for the arrival for most of our schools. And I can speak to that. I will also be speaking to some of the important observations that your children will make during the course of the school day. I'll speak to lunch. There were some changes that we had to implement for lunch as a result of some of the changes that came through for the on the state guidance. We'll also speak to dismissal, quarantines. We'll speak to sick students who are ill, and we'll speak to some of the end of the year things, although I don't have much information to share on the end of year items at this point. There was a 9-page document issued the afternoon of Monday, April 12th. And again, we're seeking clarification. And I'll share with you some of the things that we're hoping to clarify with the state DOH and legal counsel. So before I go anywhere in this update, today was such a special day in our school district. The energy was palpable. And I think your children would share that with you, whether they're in kindergarten or in 12th grade and every grade in between. The children were back in our buildings for the first time in 13 months. And oh, how we missed them. And to have them return to our school buildings, their school buildings, was such an important next step for us. Every child with whom I interacted, and I visited 4 of our schools today. I didn't have the opportunity to visit with Mohansick, but I will be at Mohansick tomorrow morning. I had the opportunity to visit with 4 of our schools. I spoke to students and I just said, how does it feel to be back? And at every grade level, the overwhelming response was great. The word great is what every child whom I spoke said. So it's terrific to have them back. Our faculty and staff are excited. We've had our elementary school students back K4 prior to this week, but there's, from the district perspective and from my perspective, there's something really special about having our entire K-12 student population back. For those who chose in-person learning, we do have students who have remained in the fully remote model, and we certainly respect that. And we're happy that those students are continuing with the learning model that they're most comfortable with. And that's why we're offering that model through the remainder of this school year, through the end of June. With regard to just a few things, I'm going to go sequentially through the day of a child as I give this update. I tend to see the world through the eyes of a child, or at least education through the eyes of a child. So I'd like to take you through their day and speak to some of the changes. So the first piece is arrival. Children arrive to our campuses either by car or by bus. In some instances, students walk to our campuses, but there are very few students walking to our campuses. But the vast majority of students are being transported on a school bus or in the car. I said this in my letter on Friday. Please be patient with the lines at arrival. I was at the middle school. The arrival took a little bit longer. We had more cars than we had seen even prior to COVID. We track cars coming through our campus. We know the exact counts of cars that are coming through our campus as we monitor them. Do we monitor them every day? We don't, not the exact number of cars, but many days we do monitor the number of cars coming through our campus. The number of cars that came through our campus today was more than we had seen even prior to COVID. Also, today was like another first day of school. So there was a little bit of a delay that I anticipate diminishing. I saw a student go back and kiss their dog goodbye. I hadn't seen it once in my career, 20 years, I hadn't seen this, but I did see it happen twice today. The first day pictures, forgot your mask, go back and get the mask, forgot the backpack, go back and get the backpack. Those types of things tend to correct themselves with time. So I do anticipate that the line and the wait will be a little bit shorter. And also as we get more comfortable with the school buses, that's also another option. At Crampon, at Mohansick, Brookside, it's a very efficient approach. Same thing at the high school here. All of the buildings have the most efficient possible operation. There is the reality of volume. Car volume is a reality that we're working through, and we have implemented plans and staffing and procedures to help minimize the time that you spend online dropping your children off. I ask that you be patient. I ask that you adhere to all the traffic patterns. People outside are just doing their jobs. As they ask you to go in a certain direction or to stop or to proceed, I would ask that you be respectful of them. They're doing their jobs and they're trying to protect your children. With regard to the bus, if your child's riding the bus, and we have seen an increase in ridership, it's not at the level where we were prior to the pandemic, but we have seen an increase. I've been pretty clear, I've been very clear about ridership going up may result in more than one student to a seat. We experienced that on some of our buses today. That will continue to increase. I just want to be upfront and transparent with our community that the more students who ride the bus, the greater the likelihood that we will have two students sitting in a seat, not from the same household. When your child gets on the bus, I would encourage them to take a window seat in an open seat. If children are filling the perimeter seats around the bus, and I personally measured this, it's more than 6 feet of distance away from one seat, window seat to the next on our buses. And that's on the larger buses. So filling the window seats first is helpful in that regard. If the windows are open when your child arrives on the bus, please ask them not to touch the windows. Our bus drivers will advise them of that as well. We want the windows open for a reason. We want the roof hatches open for a reason, and that's to increase the ventilation on the bus. With regard to the bus, you can anticipate some delays in dismissal this first week of school as we reopen. I said the reopening is much like that first week of school, so the bus may run a few minutes behind in the afternoon. In the morning, the buses should be running on or very close to their schedule, and you should not anticipate delays in the morning. In the afternoon, there may be some delays depending on the traffic on the roads, traffic on the campus, the congestion to exit the campus. So I do just want to caution you of that. But again, over time, those issues correct themselves. And we see that happen every September. I speak to this from a position of experience. Those issues correct themselves after the first couple weeks of the runs. Continuing on with the school day, please complete the health screening. Easy Screen is the platform that we selected. That is also, it's continuing to be a requirement of the New York State Health Department. So please continue to complete the Easy Screen. Now you have to complete the Easy Screen every day, 5 days a week. If your children are returning to in-person learning, you'll have to complete the Easy Screen. Ideally, there's a temperature check happening at home so that you can attest to the fact that your child does not have a fever. We will check their temperature again. If the temperature is above a 99.5, we will recheck the temperature in a few minutes, and if it goes up from there or it doesn't decrease from there, we will be calling home. With regard, and quite often the temperature threshold has been at about 100. 100.0 is quite often where we've been. With regard to arrival, They've gone through our screening. You've completed the easy screen. They're going to go to their class, whether it's middle school, high school, it's first period. No lockers at the middle school and high school. We don't want the students congregating in the hallways at their lockers, so lockers are not permitted. Use of lockers are not permitted at this time. And everything I say, I just want to qualify, everything that I do share is always going to be at this time, because the guidance can change tomorrow. The guidance can change in a week. And I think everyone understands how fluid the situation is. And what I say today may not necessarily hold tomorrow. For example, the 6 feet or barriers. That was true on April 9th at 8:41 p.m. At 8:42 p.m., we received an email saying that, hey, you don't need the barriers anymore. So we'll talk more about the barriers in a moment. But I just want to share with you that the guidance that we receive from the State Department of Health, from the State Education Department, from the local Department of Health is constantly changing. So the one conversation that I'm hoping to avoid is, but you said, because I'm quite aware of what I've said. These are all recorded, so there's a recorded history of everything that I've said, but the guidance is changing and the information that we receive as a school district is constantly changing, and we need to adapt to the latest and most current guidance. Upon entry, so the lockers are going to be off limits at this point, middle school and high school. In the elementary schools, students will report to their classrooms. There will be assigned seating. K-12, there will be assigned seating in all of their classes. There's a specific way that we're assigning the seats at the middle school and high school so that we can cut down on the number of students that any one student is exposing should that one student test positive for COVID. We understand the disruption that quarantines cause. We understand the fear that can be that can accompany being quarantined. We have multi-generational households, and we understand that, and we're sensitive to that. We have other medical circumstances within homes that we're aware of. So we understand the fear that can accompany being quarantined. So we're trying to do our best, not trying, we are doing our best to minimize that number. Now, the students are sitting in a classroom. They are at least 3 feet apart. In some instances, it's more. In no instances will it be less. We are continuing with the barriers for now. I just want to qualify that. That's not to say that in 2 weeks or a month's time the barriers have been removed. Today was the first day back for all of our students. The guidance for the last 9 months has accepted barriers, and for the past 7 days has been that you don't need barriers. So we're working through the change in the guidance, trying to understand the position of the state DOH a little bit better. What I will tell you is that there are snacks happening in classrooms. It's for a shortened amount of time. We're under the CDC threshold for quarantine, so quarantines will not be issued as a result of snack in a classroom, because we have restructured the way snack is facilitated at the elementary grades. But the barriers are another mitigating factor for large particles in the classrooms, especially for those few minutes when masks are down. So we're not at the point where we're removing barriers. I understand the concern with let's remove barriers, but I understand the other side of the concern that the barriers are not high enough and we need larger barriers and barriers that come out more. So I understand both sides of the concern. I've received one email on each side. We'd like bigger barriers, or have you considered removing the barriers? And I understand that. And please know that I'm aware of it. And please know that we continue to study this. You all know this, my kids are in school too. My kids want the barriers down. I've heard from teachers who'd like the barriers down. And then I've heard from staff who'd like barriers that are a little bit more substantial. And I've heard from families where they'd like barriers that are more substantial. I understand it. I understand both sides of the issue. I understand both sides of the concern. My primary interest here is the health and safety of your children and our staff. and we're going to work through that. So right now, the barriers are staying up for the time being. Please understand it has been one day that K-12 has been back. So there is not going to be a decision to remove the barriers at this point. I've consulted with our medical director, I've consulted with the state DOH. The idea about the degradation of the ventilation is not true. I do want to speak to the ventilation. I think that's something that's not fully understood. So I do want to share with you a little bit about our ventilation system in our schools. We have, and the guidance spent several pages. It was 24 pages, and they devoted multiple pages to ventilation because that's an important piece here. So what you'll hear is three different systems that we have in place. There are these unit ventilators. Unit ventilators introduce fresh air from the outside. So the unit ventilators, our classrooms are approximately 7,500 cubic feet. So 750 square feet with 9.5-foot ceilings. We can round that to 10 feet. And just by doing the math, the volume of the room is about 7,500 cubic feet. The unit ventilators are introducing between 1,000 and 1,500 cubic feet per minute. So when you think about the volume of the room, the number of air changes, the air is being displaced, that volume of air is being displaced every 5 to 7.5 minutes. Over the course of a 42-minute period, like we have at the secondary level or even during the instructional day in the elementary schools, there are multiple circulations of the air. There are multiple air changes in the room. You've heard the term air changes. How many air changes are happening in the room? Well, 5 to 7.5 minutes, we're having one air change. So over the course of a 42-minute period, it's a pretty substantial number of air changes, upwards of 8 air changes that we're having, which is an excellent number for our district. We also have the air conditioned HVAC systems that's set on a closed system, MERV 13 filtration on those units, and then there are the windows as well. So I actually took a video of one of our classrooms at Brookside, and you can actually see some of the papers at the door blowing, and that's just evidence, further evidencing the air circulation that we have in the classroom. So it's our ventilation system. We were really fortunate to be ahead of the curve with our ventilation system, and we just made some upgrades, some strategic upgrades to introduce the MERV 13 filters into our existing infrastructure. With regard to phys ed and music, the guidance has been reduced from 12 feet to 6 feet. I've always supported going from 12 feet to 6 feet because of some of the other safety measures that we have in place, the ventilation being first and foremost, and then with the instruments, we do have the covers. So, we are able to distance ourselves in a way that creates a safer environment for our students. So the biggest change to the guidance for phys ed and for music, specifically chorus and band, has been from 12 feet to 6 feet. In the cafeteria, the biggest change for us is it's no longer 6 feet or barriers, it must be 6 feet. So we have reconfigured our cafeterias again to provide for 6 feet of space. In some of the elementary schools, we've had to take part of the gym, and we've erected a tent at Crampond. We have outdoor space for use at Brookside. At the high school, there's a beautiful tent with picnic tables and Adirondack chairs in the 2 courtyards for our students to enjoy the open air and to be outside when they have a meal at the high school level. So the tents were not up at the high school until mid-morning, I would say, or actually late morning, early afternoon today. So the students will have them for use moving forward. So we are getting creative in providing our students with additional space options, but students will be 6 feet. The one thing that I observed, and we did make multiple announcements, I visited 3 of our schools for lunch today, is that the table benches are 8 feet long, so the students can sit on either end and have more than 6 feet of distance between them. But there's this tendency to move toward the barrier and to sit at the barrier. So if you can just remind your children to sit at the end of the table, not so close to the barrier, we'll continue to remind them as well. And it assists with the quarantines. So that is one of the biggest updates, and that was probably the biggest impact that the 24-page new guidance that came out on the 9th had on our district, is just looking at lunch a little bit differently. We've made that change, and we can meet that readily. With regard to the hallway and passing, there will be some congestion, middle school, high school, absolutely. The energy is something that I haven't experienced in quite some time in our school buildings. So it was terrific to have so many students. The students were great wearing their masks today. I was in, as I mentioned, 4 schools, 3 during lunch, but 4 altogether today. And the students are terrific on wearing the masks. And I don't know how happy they are to wear masks outside of schools, but inside of the school, they're perfectly happy wearing their masks, and I believe they're perfectly happy being in school. They're not using the lockers, so that's limiting the ability to gather in front of a locker, in front of a common area. The students are generally moving. At least I observed 3 class changes today at the high school and 1 at the middle school. And the students are going from one class to the next, and they're really not stopping to socialize or not removing their masks. They're going from one class to the next. So there is congestion, but it's very brief interactions. It would not meet, not even closely meet the CDC criteria for an exposure. It's a matter of seconds, or the interactions that are being had in the hallway. In some cases, it may be a minute, maybe 2 minutes of interaction in the hallway, tops, because the children only have under 4 minutes to get from one class to the next. Dismissal, I do want to share that dismissal is going to take some time. Dismissal is more challenging than arrival, because dismissal requires us to, at the elementary grades, that is, and at the middle school, requires us to match a child to the person picking them up. That takes a little bit more time than someone dropping their child off at school and there's not necessarily a match. We want to, at arrival, securely bring the children into our school buildings. At dismissal, not only do we want them to safely depart, we want to match them, obviously, to the correct person picking them up. Please be patient with us. Please understand that in 3 of our school buildings, there are children who theoretically can walk home or will ride a bike home. So children can come out of nowhere. Please, please follow all of the traffic rules. I don't know how to say it in a more direct way. Please follow the traffic patterns. Please follow the directions of the individuals who are guiding you through the parking lot. Please keep a reduced speed. And please look out for children who may be crossing, or other vehicles that are coming out of parking spaces. We all have the same objective, and I appreciate your support in that. It will get better. It will get quicker. The process will definitely speed up. As you think back to every September that your children have been in school, those first few days, that first week of school has been longer lines, longer at pickup. For those at Mohansick and at Brookside, you'll notice that the times are increasing, are getting better. Even now, they're getting better. You'll see me outside quite often. You'll see me outside and you'll see me looking at my watch. What am I doing? I'm looking at my watch because I'm keeping track and time of our times, the bus arrival times, the bus departure times, what percentage of buses are in at a given time. So you'll quite often see me looking at my watch, and it's just recording those times mentally as to where we are in our arrival. Are we getting better? Is there a delay? Is there anything that needs to be amended for the next day? So with that said, with the dismissal and the arrival, the campuses are not built to hold cars that arrive a half hour, 40 minutes earlier. We just don't have the infrastructure to accommodate 75 cars or 100 cars to just wait on our campus. So I would ask that you try to time your arrival as close to dismissal as possible. As the weather gets nicer, if you arrive during the instructional day, we will have students being brought outside for classes, and that just creates a whole nother set of logistical and safety concerns that we have. So I would just ask that you be mindful of the time that you're arriving onto our campus. So with regard to dismissal, that's, I think, the extent of the update that I can provide you. Not much more has changed. I just want to come back to lunch. This is not related necessarily to the COVID guidance, but lunch is still free. The USDA has a free lunch program for all students. And the students, and it runs, I believe, through the end of the school year. The guidance that we've been provided is it's one of two options. It's either the end of the school year or until the funds run out. At this point, they've renewed it through the end of the school year. Prior to that renewal, it was up around December, but they've extended it through the end of the school year. I do think that the program will run through the end of the school year. There is no change in process for your child. They will go in, they will order lunch. So tomorrow's lunch at the elementary schools is a pizza bagel. I know that because I have two children who don't want the pizza bagel. They're going to have the bagel instead. So the children will go in, they will order the food, they will state what they'd like to eat that day, and it's simply provided to them, and the account is not charged. So there's no special form that you have to fill out. There's no paperwork for you to return or any other steps that you have to take. Your child just simply would order lunch the normal way that they would order lunch, and the meal would be provided at no cost, and there would not be a reduction from the account. At the high school level, some students do try to get two lunches. It's only the first lunch that's going to be free. The second lunch will not be free. Any additional items off of the menu will not be free of charge. Those will be charged. So if your child decides that they would like to have snacks or some additional menu item beyond what's on that menu, on the school lunch menu, those would be charged at the rates that the cafeteria has set. With just continuing to move forward, quarantines, I just want to talk about quarantines for a moment. The quarantine rules have not changed. The CDC guidance and the DOH guidance, and please know that we follow New York State DOH and Westchester County DOH. So I understand that the CDC has their recommendations and their guidance, and we respect those, and we watch those very carefully, and we study them. It's the New York State DOH and the Westchester County DOH guidance that we have to follow as a public school district. So the State Department of Health has issued guidance on quarantines that call for contact within 6 feet for 10 or more minutes cumulative over a 24-hour period. So it's not continuous contact. And I see we have a Q&A here tonight. So you're welcome to ask questions. I would just ask that you pose the questions after I've addressed the presentation for this evening, because I may address your question already, or I may have that in my notes to address during the presentation. So with regard to quarantines, the guidance has not changed. 6 feet, within 6 feet for 10 or more minutes cumulatively. So 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes here. If that adds up to 10 or more minutes within 6 feet, your child will be quarantined. This model of 3 feet of distance will result in more quarantines. Prior to the 3 feet of distance, prior to the 3 feet, we had 6 feet of separation. So we were able to keep children 6 or more feet apart, which really reduced the number of students who were quarantined. The guidance on quarantines is still at 6 feet. Distance between desks is anywhere between 3 and 6 feet at this point. So theoretically, in a music classroom, I wouldn't expect quarantines without knowing the situation, without knowing all of the details. But in a band class, students are supposed to be 6 feet apart. So I would not expect quarantines to result from a band class. But in a mathematics class, where the desks are spaced 3 or 3.5 feet apart, there will be quarantines. And there are quarantines in front, to my left, to my right, behind me. and also diagonally, the seats diagonally. If the person in front of me is 3 feet away and all the desks are 3 feet apart, the person diagonally from me is 4.2 feet away. So that less than 6, and that would result in quarantines. So I wanted to just share that with you, because I do see that as a potential for an increased number of quarantines. So with that said, there are some exceptions to quarantines. Individuals who are 2 or more weeks past their second dose or their final vaccination dose, if it's a one shot or if it's a 1-dose vaccine, anyone 2 weeks or more away from their final dose of the vaccination would be exempt from quarantine rules. So in our school, the implication obviously is on faculty and staff, because you can't open a school if you don't have the faculty and staff to open a school building, but also for students who are 16, 17, and 18 years old in our school. So students specifically at the high school level who are fully vaccinated, if they're exposed, they would not be required to quarantine by definition, so that we all have a common definition. The definition that the Department of Health uses for fully vaccinated is 2 or more weeks beyond your final dose of the vaccination. Or if you had tested positive for COVID within 90 calendar days. So within 90 days, if you tested positive for COVID, you would not have to quarantine. We've had instances where someone tested positive 95 days prior. Those individuals would have to quarantine. And please understand, it's not the school who quarantines someone. We are not the quarantining authority. We're the educational authority. We teach children. Public health is left to the departments of health. So we are required to provide the names of the close contacts to the Department of Health. The Department of Health then issues the quarantines. And if there's a question, they will reach back out to us to confirm what the situation was or to clarify the situation. So we work very closely with the Department of Health, specifically the Westchester County Department of Health we work very closely with, but we also have a good relationship with Putnam County's Department of Health and the State Department of Health. If your child is sick, I just want to share this because I feel it important to do so. Many of you who've watched the previous presentations have heard me say, please keep a sick child home. You may not be sure of what the condition is. If you're unsure, you have questions, please reach out to the health office. It's confidential, it's discreet. You can call and share with them the situation. They have worked with hundreds of students throughout the course of this year. We have had over 300 COVID cases, many of whom were fully remote, so they weren't in our school building, but we've had those cases and we've worked through those cases. So the experience of our school nurses is phenomenal. If you have a question, please call. If someone in the home is awaiting COVID results, and I'm not referring to, I get tested twice a week for my job. I'm talking about, I'm not quite feeling well, or I was exposed to someone and I'm going to get a COVID test. Please keep everyone home, because we've seen this happen. We've seen this happen more than 5 times. We've seen this happen more than 10 times, where someone in the house was awaiting COVID results. They weren't feeling well. They sent their child to school, found out that someone in the household was positive, take the child out of school, child tests positive, the class is quarantined, and there's 10 days where everyone's home. So we don't want that to be the case. If we can avoid that for just the greater good of our school community, we would certainly appreciate the partnership and the support in following that request. In terms of just some of the other details, and I am winding down our presentation this evening, and certainly there'll be some time for the questions and answers that are in the chat area. I've tried to operate this entire reopening with just the utmost transparency and sincerity. Everything that I've shared with you this evening is the situation as we know it today. So the quarantines, yes, your children may quarantine. We get no joy out of making those calls, the initial calls. That's a reality. The cafeteria 6 feet, that's the biggest change. We're keeping the classrooms at 3 to 6 feet with the barriers at this point. I'll reiterate that point. The barriers at this time are not being removed. There is a benefit. I spoke to the benefit on the large particles. They don't degrade the ventilation system, at least in our circumstance with the barriers we selected and the mechanical ventilation systems that we have in our schools. So that's not so much of the concern. There are some other concerns, I understand it, seeing the board and some of the other things that come with having a barrier in the class and the unnatural feeling of having a barrier in the class. Today is the first day that we have had K-12 back in our buildings. We're not removing the barriers on day one. We're going to see, it's a layered mitigation. It's a layered approach to mitigation. There's ventilation, there's face masks, there's a hand sanitizing stations, there's a daily disinfection that we do, there are the temperature screenings, there's a cohorting, there's the contact tracing, all of the different layers that, and then there are the barriers. These are all layers of mitigation to keep your children safe. Now, we're going to live in this model for a bit, and then we'll reassess that decision. I think one thing you all can agree to is things change and things change frequently. So I would not rule out the possibility that the barriers come down before the end of this school year, but I certainly would not commit to them on April 19th after one day of having K-12 back in our schools. So that's where we are on the barriers. I know that's been a conversation. Some districts have decided to remove them, many have not. So I know of a handful that have decided to remove the barriers. For our district with one day back, I think that's a premature decision to make. I think we need a larger sample set to demonstrate that we can return our children to school, minimize the quarantines, minimize the exposure, bring the transmission numbers down, or give the community the chance to bring the transmission numbers down. The schools are not bringing the transmission rates down. It's our actions within the community. I do want to thank our operations and maintenance staff. They have done a remarkable job of preparing our buildings. There are tape markings on the floor in the classroom to mark the desks as to where they should be so that children have that constant visual reminder. There are so many different steps that we have taken, the isolation rooms that we've, or the healthcare rooms that we've made for a suspected COVID case so that we can move the individual out from the nurse's suite or away from the nurse's suite if there's a suspected case of COVID within the school buildings. We've taken so many steps to ensure your children and our staff are safe. And we're going to continue to take those steps in a responsible way. In terms of end of year celebrations, I'll just end with this and then I'll go to any questions that have been included in the Q&A. The guidance document for end of year celebrations was released on Monday, April 12th in the afternoon, late in the afternoon, Monday, April 12th. We are there, it's a 9-page document, so it wasn't much to digest, but there are contradictions within the guidance. And there are some questions that the state DOH have included that I question whether can be legally implemented. So I've reached out to the state for clarification on their understanding of the law. I've reached out to our legal counsel on for their opinion. So for large scale events, so end of year celebrations, our cohorts, I just want to share, our cohorts are generally in the 250 area. I say generally in the 250 area because the high school is just under 250, our 8th grade is well above 250, and our 5th grade is in that vicinity as well. So all of those terminating years in the schools are in that area of 250. Obviously, Mahoning and Brookside would be almost half that amount, give or take. With these scale events where you have groups gathering, the guidance is clear that if you exceed a certain threshold, everyone attending must test negative for COVID must either produce that negative test, taken a PCR within 72 hours or a rapid within 6 hours of the event. They must show a proof of vaccination or that they were COVID positive in the past 90 days. That's not my guidance. That's a state DOH guidance. It's published here. It's a 9-page document. There are some really big implications on that, and some things that I think we need to understand better. We've only had a week to digest it. And when I say only a week, I think a week is an eternity, but not when you're reopening and trying to get children back for today. So we're looking at the end of year guidance. The goal at the high school level is to have it in person, graduation and prom. Mr. DeGennaro and his team have done a remarkable job, and our parent group at the high school, I see you all out there, and I thank you. You've all done a remarkable job, and the class of 2021 is really lucky to have the support that they've had. Our community support has been remarkable. The administrative support has been remarkable. I've been working with Mr. DeGennaro and his team behind the scenes to try to give our class of 2021 a really special send-off. There are rules, so we're working with the State Department of Health, and some of the implications are that if we are required, if we are mandated to test and we have no other choice, and it's test or no program, there are implications. If my child tests positive, that may take 8 children out of the ceremony and 8 families out of the ceremony, because their children will have been quarantined as well because they were in the same classroom or they were in close contact. So are we allowed to test? Can we test? Can we require proof of vaccination? Can we? These are all the questions that are circulating that I just need better answers to, because the guidance document that I have is rich with ideas, but lacking in detail. So we're seeking clarification. We want to make the end of year as special for our children as possible. We understand the year that we've all had. The children, the parents, the staff, the administrators in our buildings, we understand it. So we have a goal of making our end of year as special as possible, but there are a lot of unanswered questions at this point. So I do want you to be aware that my attention is moving toward these end of year. We have our students back. Obviously that will continue to maintain my attention, but we're looking toward the end of the year now. The guidance document really fell short, and we are seeking clarification. It's not unique to Yorktown, it's a New York State document, and once we have that clarification, we'll be able to release more details. So we get it. Believe me, we understand it, and we're sensitive to the needs of our students. I think you all know that. With that said, I believe I've covered the topics that I wanted to make sure that I provided the community with an update on. There are a lot of moving parts to the reopening of school. It's that first day essentially, which is exciting. We're happy to have your children back in school. I'm just going to go through the Q&A now. If you have something on your mind, please address it in the Q&A. You're welcome to address it. I will stay on as long as is reasonable. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them. I see a question here. What can, two from the same person, what can the school do to encourage parents to follow the requested traffic patterns and the stop signs during drop off and pickup? There will be, first we're going to ask people to follow the rules. I believe that most people want a safe environment. That's the first step. And if we need to go to a stricter level of enforcement, and the Yorktown Police Department has been great, and they've been on our campus and they've been so supportive of us. So we really appreciate the support that our local Yorktown Police Department has given us, and they'll obviously be enforcing the rules on the road, and they've done a tremendous job of assisting us as we need help in any capacity, in any regard. But I do believe that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of those visiting our campus are following the traffic patterns. So I do make that statement, but please understand that, truth be told, 99 out of 100 cars are following what it is that we need them to do. And with the individuals, we'll address that, whether it's a call from me, whether it's a call from the building principal, we'll absolutely address that. The cumulative time versus the continuous time, I believe I did address that. So if there's anything further for the individual who asked that question, please do feel free to call me. About the barriers, I see that, yes, we'll work toward improving that. So the children have been living with the barriers for a relatively short amount of time. They're relatively new in many of the classrooms. The high school, we didn't finish the barrier installation until this weekend. So I would say less than half of the high school had their barriers in when we left Friday. Similarly, in the middle school, I would say about 75% had their barriers in when we left on Friday. The elementary schools have had them for a little bit longer. So we will work through the concerns that are, I can't hear, or if I'm having difficulty either hearing or seeing, the teacher will work through those within our respective buildings. I appreciate you bringing it to our attention. So we're recording all of the questions that are here so that we can make sure that we share those with our larger administrative team, because it's important for us all to know what's on your mind, what is the experience that your child is sharing with you, so that we can be sensitive to that and address those items as quickly and swiftly as possible. So I see that question. Jennifer, we're happy to have your daughter back full-time. It's terrific that she's enjoying the return to school. We're happy to hear that. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to address them. Just a few more minutes. Okay, so for those who may not see the Q&A, there's a Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. So if you're interested in typing in a question or a response or a comment, you're welcome to do so. Anything that's typed in there, I will absolutely address. Mr. Dial, thank you. I see you. Thank you. I appreciate that. If there's anything at all that's on your mind that you'd like to share, you're welcome to. I would encourage you to contact the building principals if you have questions, or your child's teacher if it's specific to the classroom. If it's specific to building policies or procedures, please do contact the building principal. And if it's something that's more on the district level, that I'll be best equipped to answer that. Okay, with that said, I'm not seeing any additional comments. I just want to thank you. Thank you so many. We have so many people on this call, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. I thank our administrators, our teachers, faculty, and staff have done a remarkable job. We have the best school nurses in the region. I say that every time, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that again. Our facilities and custodial staff, everyone takes the job of protecting your children and our staff really seriously. Our custodians know how important their work is by disinfecting the classrooms nightly. We're no longer required to do that. The new guidance doesn't require us to disinfect nightly. We will continue to disinfect nightly because it's the right thing to do. So we'll continue doing that. No, the question is a positive antibody test enough to avoid quarantine? That is not enough to avoid quarantine. The restrictions to avoid quarantine at this point, if somebody meets the criteria for quarantine, the criteria to exit quarantine would be a positive COVID result in the last 90 days or 2 weeks beyond the final dose of the vaccination. Outside of that, if the individual meets the criteria for quarantine, they would be required to quarantine. So the antibodies tests, the Department of Health has informed us, is not sufficient to clear someone from quarantine. Okay. I hope your questions have been answered to the greatest extent possible. I understand there are a lot of unanswerable questions at this point. We're going through this journey together. It's great to have your children back. There will be bumps in the road. I said this on March 1st when I announced the reopening. We're going to get through them. and we're going to get through them well, and we're going to get through them together as a school community. But your children are so happy to be back. They are absolutely so happy, and we're so happy to have them back. So I look forward to seeing so many of you at Arrival tomorrow, and for the children who come off the bus, I'll be greeting them in their classrooms. We're back, and it's terrific to be back. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. I've taken one last look. So thank you all for joining. Have a great evening.